Good afternoon, everybody, all of our followers and viewers out there in social media land. Welcome to another PBALC informational live stream. And we also want to thank, as always, Southwest 66 Credit Union for sponsoring all of our 2023 live streams. We greatly appreciate it. Today, we welcome guest DeMario Phipps-Smith. I hope I'm saying that correctly. He is the manager of community learning at Learning for the News Literacy Project. Mr. Smith will be teaching us about news literacy, which is such an important topic, especially in the nowadays. It's so important to know that our news sources are trustworthy and that we're well informed and engaged in local, national, and global events. So he's going to be telling us more about that. We're so happy to have you today.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. First of all, start off by telling us a little bit about yourself and about the organization.
Awesome. So I am a resident of Chicago. You can see all my Bears stuff in the background. I grew up on the west side of Chicago, in one of the more marginalized communities in Chicago. But early into my career, I knew I wanted to use my voice and use my platform to tell some really interesting stories about people and to really give people insight on what life is like in the west side of Chicago. And so that led me to a number of different places. I started my career at the Chicago Sun-Times. I was able to freelance at a number of different organizations like Blavity.com, which is a Black-owned media site. And so I came to the News Literacy Project because during my time as a daily working journalist, I really became aware of the disconnect that people have with the news. Like there's so much mistrust around it. And a lot of my thinking went around like, how do I help solve this gap? How do I help bridge this gap and make people understand how vital credible news is to their ability to live lives as engaged citizens in our democracy? The News Literacy Project is a nonpartisan national education nonprofit that provides programs, resources for educators and the general public to teach and learn the skills to be active consumers of news and information, and so that they can become equal and engaged participants in our democracy. NLP has been doing this work in news literacy since 2008. It was founded by a Pulitzer-winning journalist named Alan Miller. He visited his daughter's middle school class to discuss the work that he did as a journalist and just saw the potential and the value of journalists being able to be in classrooms and help students understand what the news process is like. And so now we've grown into this organization that's powered by a movement to help make America more news literate.
Perfect. Well, we always tell everybody that literacy is more than just teaching people how to read and write. It includes all aspects of literacy, whether that be teaching people how to learn English, whether that be health literacy is a big part of literacy, news literacy, financial literacy, all of those topics encompass literacy. So literacy is more than just reading and writing, right? So can you tell our viewers and followers what exactly is news media literacy? Because a lot of people don't really think that that's really literacy, but it really is.
Yeah, so news literacy sits inside of the research initiative of media literacy, but news literacy specifically is the ability to determine the credibility of news and other types of information. It includes the ability to identify different types of information and how to use the standards of fact-based journalism to determine what to trust. And we believe that a more news literate society means that more people recognize the critical role of the First Amendment and a free press in our democracy.
Perfect. And so what are your advice for the public to best evaluate the credibility of a news claim, for example?
That's an amazing question. Thank you for that. I would say that it really, to me, it really, and a lot of my work is grounded upon the standards of quality journalism. To some people, it's 7, sometimes it's 6 or 8, but really those standards of quality, ethical journalism, I think, is a great way to start. You want to know first who is producing this, right? Who is producing this piece of news content? Is this place credible? Do they have bylines in it so that you can go and see the author who actually wrote the story? Do they list their sources and attribute to the different sources that they get information from? All of these different techniques and tools that you can use can help you determine what you feel like is most credible and trustworthy for your news consumption.
And so when you talk about standards of quality, can you give us, can you go more in depth about what the standards of quality are for journalists in particular?
Yeah, so some of the major ones are like accountability, transparency. And so like with accountability, right? When you get something wrong, when you spell someone's name wrong, or you get a title wrong, or you misprint how much money someone makes in their career, it's important to let the public know. It's important to let your audiences know that we take accountability for getting this wrong. We realize that we got this wrong, and we're going to correct ourselves. We're going to do it very publicly. We're not going to just change something overnight and act like it wasn't wrong. We're going to we're going to invite people into the process, right?
Okay.
So that's the accountability part. The transparency part, another big journalism paradigm, is really being clear about where you're getting things from, being transparent about where the sources are that you're getting these things from, and just inviting people into that process, right? So those are, and then things like fact checking, right? Making sure that that what you're saying is credible, and fact checking on top of that. Those type of things are really very, very, very important. I could go more in depth, but there's like 7 of them. But yeah,
Yes. And
they're
then,
very.
I know one of them is, as a journalist, you need to be unbiased in your reporting as well. And so that all comes back to accountability and the 7, standards that journalists are supposed to uphold. So give us examples of how to be a smart news consumer and use critical thinking. And just, for our viewers that don't quite understand what critical thinking is, just give us a short explanation of critical thinking and what are some smart, and then give us some examples of some smart ways that people can consume news.
Yeah, so we at NLP, we kind of look at critical thinking as kind of a charged term, especially right now. So we kind of address it more as critical rationing, right? Just
Okay.
rationing in a very critical but credible and logical way, right? You want to think deeply about things. You want to
Mhm.
research things. You want to compare notes. You want to what do you call that? You want to make sure that you practice something that we call lateral reading, which is picking different stories on the same topic, comparing different areas about that, and coming up to your own analysis of what you believe is the truth, or what you feel is truth based off of what you read. Let's see. I'm sorry, I got off the question again. Could you mind
And it's
repeating it?
give us some examples of some ways that we can be smart news consumers.
Right. So I would say, at the News Literacy Project, we don't tell people how to think or what to think when it comes to
Mhm.
news judgment. We want to give people the tools and the training so they can do it for themselves, so they can come up with their own definition of what credible news is, or what
Okay.
trustworthy news is for them. But I would say some of those things are along the lines of making sure that this is a journalism or a news outlet that literally upholds the standards of quality journalism. I think, to make it very simple, that's a really good way to go about it. You want to make sure this is a credible source, something that has reported on these type of issues frequently and have a history behind it, that they have some accountability for their mistakes, and that they're they're a voice in whatever community that you're in. And I think a good way to also think about your personal news judgment is really focusing in on local news, right? Like really
Okay.
focusing in on your local newspapers, local radio stations, local outlets, because they have some of the best ground boots on the ground reporting, and they would know more than national outlets about things pertaining to your immediate life.
And no local news outlets also live in the community that they're
Yep.
reporting, so
Yep.
they have more accountability, if that makes sense, because they're living in the community. People know them, and they have a reputation to uphold. All journalists have a reputation to uphold, but I think it's more. There's more pressure on local reporters and local news outlets. Would you agree?
Literally.
Yes.
Yeah, it's
Um,
tough right now. It's really tough for all journalists, but specifically local journalists who, may not have the support of a large corporation or organization
mhm.
behind them. And it's really unfortunate because they do really important work. And, at the News Literacy Project, I think that's one of the things that we're really big proponents of. We want to help the sustainability of local news as well. That's really important to us.
Absolutely. Uh, and so you mentioned being able to, make sure that the news source is a credible source. Do you have some resources on where news consumers can verify that this is a credible news source?
Yes, so on our website, newslit.org, we have a number of trainings and resources free to the public.
Okay.
We have a number of lessons on the credibility of news, and finding trustworthy news sites.
Okay.
So if you go to newslit.org, you can check out more about our resources. They're also under a platform called Checkology, which is our free education-based platform.
Okay. And as always, after the live stream, we always post the links to our featured speakers sites, and so we'll have that your website on the comments for anybody that would like to refer back to it. But I checked it out, and the News Literacy Project has a wealth of information, so I encourage everybody to go there and research and do their research. One of the things that's come up is, everybody's like, give me data, give me numbers, but data and numbers can also be misleading. So how do you recommend that consumers use context and consideration to verify the data? Tell us more about how we can do that.
That's an awesome question and very interesting. I think to me is grounded, like good data sets are grounded in making people see the full scope, the full
Mhm.
picture of something, right? And so I think the reverse, like when it's done poorly, is when they're giving you like they're cherry picking things. They're cherry picking the
Mhm.
stats and the things that they want you to focus on. So my advice to news consumers or consumers in general of media is that you want to find, particularly when it comes to data sets, and we know that data can be manipulated, numbers can be
Mhm.
manipulated. You really want to pay attention to news sites or media makers who are sharing a complete story. Maybe their numbers aren't complete, but they're being very transparent about that. Like, hey, these
Okay.
numbers are from 5 years ago. This is, we're in 2022 now. Things have changed, right? Being
Okay.
very clear about that. Or if they do tell a more complete picture, giving you very legible and edible material, like make it very digestible for consumers, right? Numbers can be scary, they can be hard to consume. So the
Mhm.
places that make it very easy to understand and kind of can paint a picture that a regular everyday person can understand and can understand clearly, that's a good sign. But even then,
Okay.
you still want to be critical of the information that you're seeing. And I think the good places will make you feel less hesitant because they'll have all these sources, they'll have their numbers straight, they'll explain to you what these different charts and graphs mean. So I think that that's a great kind of way to view it.
Hmm. Unfortunately, during during the hard times of COVID and pandemic. It was both sides were like, oh, they were throwing out numbers, but this side would throw out these numbers and this side would throw out these numbers. So it's just important you can't just like I said, data numbers can be misleading. So you have to really um, do your research and make sure that you're putting consideration into those numbers. And like you said, if they're saying, if the numbers say we only surveyed this amount of people, if they're being very transparent, then that is a good way of making sure that those numbers are not misleading, because they're upfront and saying, we only surveyed this amount of people. We didn't survey the entire United States, or however they
Hearing from a graph that like 97% of people died is really terrible, and that's very emotionally gripping. But if you dug deeper and got to the numbers, and it was only like 30 people, out of a hospital or of something, some huge number that they kind of like skewed, it really changes the information for you and how you can receive it. So it is really important to be very mindful of numbers. And some of the best places, I think the places that are credible and that you can trust, are places that usually really spell this out for you and go into detail and aren't hiding their facts.
They'll say up front, we surveyed just our hospital, and just our hospital had this many deaths, so or receive the got COVID or something like that. So just make sure that you dig deeper before believing all the data and the numbers. Okay, so this is a big one that's been, especially after the pandemic. How do we spot conspiracy theories?
Wow. Also a really great question. That one is really hard because of the fact that, to be honest, a lot of conspiracy theories, the reason why people gravitate to them and latch on to them is because a lot of times they do hinge on maybe even just a small
little grain of truth.
A small little thing that becomes truth, or that is truth, and then people blow it up into something bigger, right? So I think when you're considering something that might be a conspiracy theory, or you're unsure about it, here are some telltale signs. The discussions around it, it might be in an echo chamber, meaning most of the conversation around something is completely one-sided, right? You might be inside of a Facebook group or some type of online community, maybe like a Reddit thread or something, and everybody is only talking one way about something. They're only saying that, the government is behind this, or big pharma is behind this. That should probably be a sign right there that this might be a conspiracy theory. Another one is to pay attention to the messages that are on social media about it as well. Not just online in general, but you want to pay attention to some of the messages as well. Conspiracy theories really hinge upon manipulating your emotions and your emotions and your biases. And so those things are really powerful for us because they help form our perspective of the world. And so if you got somebody, if you got these really powerful things around, child vaccinations or COVID mortality, those are very emotionally compelling things. I mean, it is, regardless of how you feel about it, it's just very compelling. And so it's easy to manipulate people when they have such a strong emotional attachment to something. So those are some of the things that you really want to watch out for. You want to, I think when it comes to conspiracy theories, you really want to be plugged into into conversations where they are holistic and there's other sides to things. A lot of things can be considered conspiracy theories. Sorry, that's my thing in the background. But there are a lot of things that can be considered conspiracy theories, but I think there are conversations had in certain ways, more logical arguments. That takes into a different realm. Now you're just having a conversation when you're able to have both sides. You're able to talk about different things. But when you're stuck in conversations that's only propping up one side and completely discrediting anything that argues against that, even if it's factual or scientific. You really want to pay attention to the type of things that are being said and what the feel of the community is. And definitely stay away from echo chambers that are only propping up one thing.
Absolutely. And don't spread conspiracy theories.
Definitely.
That's not the best way to get your point across. And we'll talk a little bit more about it, about that, how to get your point across here later in the interview. But another thing is that I wanted to bring up, because a lot of there's been a lot of talk about it, is what is a troll?
Yeah, there are a lot of ways.
A troll is on the same line, I think, of a conspiracy theory, but
Right.
a lot of people don't really understand what a troll is and how it starts.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways of looking at that. There's some pop culture ways, but I think generally the way that we talk about trolls are, they're not necessarily disinformers, meaning that they don't necessarily come up with misinformation with the intent to deceive. Sometimes they are, but sometimes trolls can be people who are just misinformers, people who are spreading misinformation but believing that it's true, right? And you can get to different, being a troll is on the spectrum. Sometimes you know that what you're saying is completely wrong and you just want to, just cause some discord and some political malcontent amongst people. Sometimes that's what people want to do. But then you also have on the other end of the spectrum people who might be a little bit more altruistic, but really they're just spreading misinformation and kind of being jerks about it. So it's kind of on a spectrum of not necessarily intentionality, but like where their perspectives are. There are people trying to do good, right? They're altruistic in nature when it comes to spreading things, but what they're spreading is misinformation and they're beating people over the head with something that isn't true. But then you also have people who are very conscious that what they're talking about may not be true. They don't even care if it's true. They just want to be anarchistic in a way.
So how can we avoid trolls, or for lack of a better word, not delete them, but just avoid them and not, have anything to do with them?
Yeah, that's also a great question. I think the trouble with that is they're kind of impossible to avoid. You're going to find them in forums, you're going to find them in chats, you're going to find them in Zoom calls, all type of things. They're kind of unavoidable at this point. But what I would say is that whether or
Don't
not
buy
you
into them, or
whether or not you want to engage with them is up to you, right? We all want to be champions of not spreading misinformation, right? Of spreading things that are credible, verified, and have been fact checked. And so, yeah, if you do feel the need, some conversations with people who believe conspiracy theories or people who believe in misinformation, to you, some of those relationships are important and necessary. So sometimes those conversations are worth having. But generally speaking, if you feel like this person is just one of those really bad trolls who don't really have any good intentions, then it's probably best for you to avoid conversations with them at all. Like, why waste your energy on a conversation that somebody has already determined how it's going to go? Right? Like, don't even waste your energy talking to that person. Conserve that and save that for somebody who might be more open-minded.
Okay, perfect. And that venue, engaging in conversations so that both sides, can learn what's the best way to correct a falsehood, or have a conversation with somebody without starting a showdown.
Yep. This is another presentation that we do often, especially around election cycles, around productive conversations, around misinformation and stuff.
Yes.
But I would say a lot of it starts with empathy, and we practice this through a method we call PEP, which is patience, empathy, and persistence. You want to have the patience to know that like people are on different spectrums of their journey about being enlightened to something being misinformation. To be honest, people in their minds, they believe in what they believe as much as you believe in the thing that you're trying to get them to realize. So instead of trying to come at them like, oh, you're so wrong, I can't believe that you believe this, right? it should be a journey. Like, okay, well, if you believe this, well, here's 3 articles that I've seen from credible news organizations that counteract or counter what this base is saying, right? You don't want to literally tell them that they're wrong, because you want them to. It's a journey to get into, not necessarily enlightenment is a big word, but it's a journey to knowledge, right? It's a journey to get into that place. And so you want to help them walk that. You want to have the empathy to know that, like, you're not always right. You just have some information that you want to share with people, and everybody's experiences and their beliefs and their opinions are important, right? Yours isn't no more important than anybody else's. So you want to have the empathy to approach people with a certain posture, even though you're trying to correct them to that something is misinforming them. You still want to have a good posture about being open-minded and having some emotional intelligence. And then the last part, the patience part, is knowing that sometimes these conversations will be over a day. More than likely, they're going to be multiple days, maybe weeks, maybe even months on end at a time, right? These are ongoing conversations that you're having with people. So you need to have the patience to know when that's the person that's in your life you need to have these type of difficult ongoing conversations with, and also knowing when to stop having these conversations with people. If you're constantly going up against a wall, they're not listening to any of the research that you're finding, they're not checking in on any of the facts that you're providing them with, and like, you're not beating them over the head, you're just giving them these tools to research themselves. And if they're getting to a point where it's just pointless and they're not really responding to what you have to offer, then just take steps back. Just remove yourself from the conversation, take some step back, protect your energy, because there are other people that you should probably be using that on to get them to consider what they believe might be misinformation.
And just, it's, the world nowadays, it's like we're not listening to each other's perspectives, so just be open-minded to other people's perspectives. They may have had some life circumstances in their life that led them to believe this way, and versus your life, everybody has very different life circumstances. So just be open-minded, and and don't come at people harshly, because that will just close, for the most part. I've seen that it just closes people off. So
Exactly. And that's a great point. And I think to kind of like underscore that, I mean, when you think about like something like the housing industry, right? Certain people in marginalized communities might have certain experiences with it that leads them to believe more that there might be a conspiracy behind things. And instead of trying to tell these people that they're wrong and just diminishing their experiences, is worth having that. It might be worth having that conversation of, okay, well, I understand. I've heard you and I listened to your experience and I validate that. But here's some other information about the policies, the programs that the housing industry is trying to implement. And whereas this person might not be convinced, right? They may have had enough experiences with a certain entity or an organization that they're just going to believe the worst about them anyway. But I don't think that is in good practice or good nature to try to undermine someone's experiences just because you haven't went through that. So that's exactly why the empathy part is so important.
Exactly. And like everybody says, there's always 2 sides to every story, right? So that is correct in every way. There's always 2 sides to every story, and we need to be open-minded to hear everybody's story. And you said in the news, just relying on credible news and credible sources to prove your point as well. But don't come to it like, no, I have proof here that this is incorrect. Just say, listen. A lot of conversations are all about listening to listening and not shouting over each other.
Your verified sources may not be someone else's verified sources. So like, even though you're coming from a well-researched point and all these things. You got things that you consider facts. To other people, it might look like something different. So it is important to think of it as more of a journey and a back and forth conversation, right? Even if they believe in something that's misinformation, there's still things that you can learn from them. So it's important to take that approach when you're having these type of conversations.
Yeah, you will learn a lot from other people's perspective as too. It's like, well, I've never thought about it that way. I've never experienced that. So, it's good to know, share information, hear everybody's story. So if people want to learn more about the News Literacy Project and the great work that y'all are doing and the initiatives that y'all have launched, where can they find information?
It's very simple. I love this for us. It's newslit, NEWSLIT.org.
Okay.
Newslit.org. You can find all of our free resources, our free trainings. We have a number of platforms, not just for educators, but also for adults and the general public. And we invite you all to use them and join us in this mission to fight misinformation and make America more news literate.
And I know on the website, I noticed that there's also curriculum that educators and just organizations can use to inform the public as well. So that's great.
Yeah, absolutely. No, we believe education is a foundation in doing this work and helping people be able to spot misinformation and find credible news sources. But we don't look at education as just in the classroom or just for young people. We believe that this type of education needs to be provided for every demographic group in America.
Yes, absolutely. And what do you recommend because we are a literacy center and we have a lot of adults with obviously low literacy skills. How do you recommend they navigate or consume news? Because sometimes it's difficult for them. I know there's a great initiative that more organizations are trying to push using plain language. Plain language. I hate to point them out, but the CCD did not do a great job of using plain language when they were informing the public. So even the public that had great literacy skills, it was hard for them to understand what was going on. So what are your thoughts on ideas on the using plain language when in news sources, and also how do you recommend adults or individuals with low literacy rates, how can they best navigate and consume the news?
Absolutely. Great question. I think the journalism industry in particular has had a tough time navigating how to serve all its audiences, especially marginalized communities. And that's people with disabilities, Black and brown people, the LGBTQ plus community. It's clear, right? We know that they have definitely underserved a number of communities. I think though, as the journalism industry is repairing these relationships, I think for an everyday person who wants to know more, be more plugged into the news, I think a great first step is finding out what news credibility means for you. What does it mean for you to trust the news? What does that look like? What is it going to take for you to trust something that somebody says? Is it going to take a number of reporters who are of your ethnic group or look like you? Is it about the type of stories that they work on? Is it about the funding structure? What is it about? What do you need in order for a news organization for you to deem it to be credible? Once you find that out, then I really recommend starting with local news, right? Starting with your ground on the boots on the ground reporting centers, the places that are giving you the info, because these places can give you the most current information about how to be civically engaged. So a lot of local newspapers and radio stations do really great work around elections and do really great explainers and how-tos on civic life. And so I think that's a great way for adults who may have low literacy or high literacy. That's a great way for you to become more active in your community, to become more aware of the resources that you can use as a citizen. So I think that those are fine. What news credibility means to you, what you feel like you can trust, and then start local before you start looking nationally at news organizations, right? And I think plain language is an ideal that we want to reach. It's just hard to decide what plain language is for everybody, right? Like
Yeah.
the journalism industry thought that like writing at a fifth grade level would be universal, right? But we're starting to see that that's clearly not universal. And the idea that that was going to be universal is ridiculous, but any type of thing being universal is almost ridiculous, especially in a country like America. So I think
Yep.
with how diverse we are. So I think that it's a challenge that the news industry, and not just news media in general, is trying to figure out how to better communicate with people. And they've tried a number of things out, but I definitely want to stay very connected to plain use language and see where it develops.
Perfect. Is there anything else that you would like to share with our viewers as we come to the end of our interview?
I just really appreciate the time. I'm really honored to be speaking with everyone today. I think the last thing I would kind of leave on is just, you know, the wish that people support more of their local news, right? Like we're in a very dire time for local news initiatives. There's a number of news deserts, and that's a term that you all should Google when you get a chance, what a news desert is. It's a huge problem in our country. And I think that by supporting your local news organizations, making donations, becoming a member, becoming a subscriber, this is how you save local news, which can help save our democracy so that people can make very informed decisions about how to be active and engaged in their communities. And I just can't underscore that enough. That is one of the biggest problems of our time. And if you want to do more in that fight and you want to support news literacy efforts, part of that is following us and making sure we're aware of the work that we're doing. But another part of that is also supporting local news initiatives.
Here in the Permian Basin, we have great local broadcasting news. We have a local NPR station, a local PBS station. All of those are great resources for information and resources too. I know the local NPR radio station, Marfa Public Radio, and then our local Basin PBS, they have a wealth of information and programs available to the community. So they are both are very involved in the community, and the local broadcasters are always involved in the community as well. So make sure and support them and rely on local news to get trustworthy information.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much, DeMario, for joining us today. We greatly appreciate all the information that you provided for us. And like I said, we will be posting the link on our comments. So make sure and check out the News Literacy Project and all the great work that they're doing there. And we'll see everybody again next month for another informational live stream. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful spring break.